Now we can start taking questions. Again, you can use them in the chat if you want to just type those out, or if you'd like to ask your questions out loud, you can turn on your microphone and your video if you'd like to, and we'll get started with those. So looks like we have a question from Becky Stone, who said, so many of these plants were brought in from Asia. Are they invasive in their native lands?
Definition of an invasive plant means that it is not native there. It could be considered a weed in its native land, but that is not the same as an invasive species. And in their native habitat, they have other species that are there to help control them. Usually there's some kind of a predator species, and the species that are native to that space co-evolved together. So coevolution is kind of like an arms race to see who can outcompete each other. So the other species that are already there are built to compete with it. And yes, a lot of them are from Asia. That is because it's on the same longitudinal plane as us. So that means that there's going to be really similar climate to what we have here, but because it's so far away, there aren't going to be a lot of the same species here to control it. There aren't going to be any of the same species here to control it, so that's why it thrives here and is not effectively controlled by anything.
We have a question from Mary Ann. I've noticed more and more phragmites on roadsides. Invasive, correct? Any Department of Transportation control measures? Sarah, I'm not familiar with that. I don't know if you are familiar with phragmites.
Yeah, I'm actually not really familiar with phragmites either, honestly. So I can look into that more for you. I don't believe that they're native, so if they are becoming a problem, they are probably listed as an invasive species, but that's not one that that I specifically have dealt with. So I can get back to you with more information about that later. And as for the question from Robert, you asked help for large areas of English ivy and a good replacement plant. So English ivy, I would say to use kind of a similar method as the second method we showed for controlling kudzu, just cutting it back and then painting the stumps where you cut it with a little bit of pesticide. It's best to get as close to the root as possible when you do that. And whenever you cut something and then put pesticide on it, it's really important that you put the pesticide on as quickly as possible, because the plant is going to realize that's a wound and kind of like cut it off. So you want that pesticide to be on there very quickly. It helps to have a buddy when you're doing that, especially with dense thickets of vines, because it's really hard to like hold it, cut it, and come in with the pesticide in that short time frame. Like ideally you would want it within like 60 seconds. And a good replacement plant, one of my favorites would be passion flower vine. It is a native vine. It produces a fruit that's kind of interesting, like tart. It's a very interesting texture, but that fruit is also, that plant is also a host plant to the Gulf fritillary butterfly. So that's going to be great because you're going to have more pollinators in your yard. The Gulf fritillary is really cute. It's got this like shiny silver color to it. It's one of my favorite native butterflies. And also the, I don't remember if it's called the blue passion flower or the purple passion flower, but it's like a bluish purple color. That one also has medicinal benefits. So that's a really good one to plant. It grows pretty fast, and because it's native, it does really well. Also, Virginia creeper is another to grow. It often resembles poison ivy, so sometimes that can be a little bit alarming to people. The older growth has 5 leaves, but the new growth has 3. But with that, you want to make sure that it's not going to grow up on any structures, because it can damage your structures. It's got these little like suckers on the end of it that it's really good at growing up walls and things like that, and it grows really fast. And it is also the host plant to a sphinx moss. It is the Virginia creeper hornworm. So you'll have another, I think that one is also a pollinator. You'll have another insect species that you're promoting by planting its host plant, and often that one will just show up on its own. But yeah, so those would be my 2 recommended vines, I would say.
And speaking of resembling poison ivy or being poison ivy, whenever you're moving these invasive plants, a lot of the vines will grow together. So you can have dense mats of kudzu with some porcelain berry growing in it and some Japanese honeysuckle in there, but also poison ivy too. They often grow together. So whenever you're removing invasive species, it's really important to have gloves on and long sleeves and long pants just to protect your skin. People kind of have various reactions to poison ivy depending on how allergic you are to the oils on there, but it is always good to have those protective layers just in case you're finding them while you're removing those other vines to those invasives. So good to keep in mind that you could run across some poison ivy.
Okay, Becky Stone asked, where can I buy the pesticides you mentioned? Are there brand names I should be looking for? So these can typically be purchased at like Lowe's, local garden stores, I believe, also have them. I think Ag Care is a big one that has them available there. Glyphosate is Roundup, but I believe when they're selling Roundup, they sell it as a pre-mixed solution. So if you're going to be doing the stump removal or the stump painting, you want to have a more concentrated chemical. So you might have to go to like Ag Care to get the like more concentrated version versus the one that you would find available more widely at like Lowe's.
And there are pesticide application classes. So you don't need a license for them if you're just doing it on your own property. If you're doing it for a job and on public lands, then you do need to be applying the pesticides under a license, so have had a class. But again, if you're on your own private land, you don't need that license to do it, but you can still take those classes to learn a bit more than what we've shared about pesticide application and kind of best practices for using it.
And whenever you are using pesticides, it's really important to wear long sleeves, long pants, and nitrile gloves because these chemicals can be harmful to your skin if you expose yourself to them. If you do get any chemical on you, you should make sure to wash off with soap and water right away. But when you're doing that, you don't want to be like just rinsing off with your hose in your yard somewhere, because then you're going to be getting that chemical wherever you're washing your hands. You want to be careful to go somewhere where it's going to be contained so you don't deal with runoff from that. Nitrile gloves are important. You don't want to wear just garden gloves because a lot of those, it's just fabric on one side of them and it will bleed right through the fabric. So you need a glove that's going to keep out that chemical.
So like the dish gloves that you use sometimes when you're doing your dishes, something that is going to be kind of more of a smooth texture than a fabric.
Yeah, those are pretty widely available. I think you could get them at like Lowe's or a store like that, even like probably a grocery store, because like Anna said, the kitchen gloves are made of the same materials. Nitrile is a type of rubber. As to your question, not rubber gloves. So if they're medical grade rubber gloves, then they probably are nitrile gloves. But yeah, the big difference there is just that they are not the soft fabric gloves that you would often use, or even leather. That's not good because it's more porous than the rubber, the nitrile. Amy's question is, will invasives require more than one application of pesticide to kill them? Potentially. Oftentimes, I wouldn't recommend spraying multiple times in one season, but after you use a control method one year, you will probably notice that there is a little bit that will come back the next year, hopefully significantly less, but you might want to follow up with another treatment the following year, or if you're spraying something like kudzu, that you're probably going to have to do in stages. You're not going to get all of it all at once, but with most pesticides, they can take up to 2 weeks to fully work. So you definitely want to wait a long period of time before you reapply, because it could just be that you're not seeing all of the results yet. And whenever you buy pesticides, there's a pretty big like booklet that comes with it that will tell you all the specific details about that chemical. So look to that for more information, and it will tell you how long it will take to go into effect, and that will help guide you as to whether or not it is time to respray, or if you just haven't seen results yet because it's still taking effect. And I can't believe I didn't mention this in the video, but make sure that it's not going to rain when you're using your pesticides, because if it rains, they take 24 hours usually to completely dry, potentially less than that, but you want to give a good window of time, at least a day, where it's not going to rain. And I know that can be difficult in this area. It tends to rain all the time and rain really unpredictably, but definitely check the weather and use your pesticides at a time when it's not likely to start raining and just cause all of that chemical to run off. Okay, Becky Stone said, I have an invasive that I don't know the name of. Is there a good guide so that I can find a name and maybe find some solutions or suggestions? So if you want to send some pictures of that invasive to waterresources@riverlink.org, I could look and help you out with that potentially. Also, there are a few apps right now that are pretty good. You can take pictures and it will give you suggestions for the ID. iNaturalist is one of them, and it's nice because it'll give you suggestions and you identify it, and then other people in the community will look at that picture and confirm it. Also, there's a group on Facebook called Asheville Plant People, and people on that group are very active, and people are often posting pictures on there asking for help with identification. So that's another community resource that you could use to help identify it.
There's also, I believe there's a PDF version of this book online, but tell me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but there's a Southeastern Guide to Common Invasive Plants. If you just kind of Google Southeastern Guide to Common Invasive Plants, or I can find that information too and include that in the follow-up email as well, as long as I'm remembering correctly. And there is an online PDF version, but it covers quite a lot of the invasives, kind of breaking them down by trees, shrubs, grasses, vines, and that includes a lot of good pictures and information about the invasives. So we can try to include that information in the follow-up email as well to give you some more online resources.
All right, and Mary Ann asks, is the fall a good time to eradicate English ivy? In general, you really want to work on removing an invasive species before it sets seeds. I actually need to look and see specifically when English ivy sets seeds, because I'm not really sure. I think that one mainly spreads through vegetative growth rather than through seeds though. So with plants like that, where they're mainly spreading through vegetative growth anyway, if you can remove it, go ahead and remove it, because even if it's not going to completely get rid of the problem right then, it will decrease the spread and decrease the damage that it does, because with porcelainberry and English ivy and these woody vines that are perennial, whatever you leave there this year is going to expand next year. So if you cut a lot of it back, even if it's not going to be gone, even if it's already set seeds, you're not going to have that old growth in addition to the new growth. So yeah, you could go and eradicate English ivy now if you would like to. Fall's a good time to plant a lot of things. So when you remove species, it's nice to put in something else that helps with reducing its ability to grow back, and it just helps prevent erosion and provides habitat and food to wildlife and pollinators. So yeah, you could remove it and plant something else in its place.
With a lot of these invasive species too, they're found on stream banks, and sometimes you can be worried about trying to dig up all of those plants and removing the roots and causing some erosion. So using those pesticides where you're just cutting to the stumps and then painting the ends of them, so really kind of a concentrated pesticide application, that can help to keep the roots in place for now while you're trying to kill the plant off. But it helps keep the soil stabilized. And you can plant using live stakes or trying to get other native plants into those as long as there's kind of cover or ground for them. So kind of a double process there, trying to keep the soil in place, not cause erosion, but trying to get rid of those invasives while making room for the native plants.
I just want to say, if you are going to be looking to plant native species to replace the invasives that you removed, Local nurseries are great for that. We work with Carolina Native Nursery a lot. They have a really good selection of plants. Also, Painter's Greenhouse is reopened for the fall this weekend, and Asheville Greenworks has their plant sale starting next Friday. So that's a really great way that you can support another local nonprofit and get some plants for a really good price to help beautify the area and give habitat for native wildlife.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you learned a lot about invasives and have had a little bit of help to know how to get rid of them on your property.